This is my first one. About time, right?
I
wasn't sure what to expect, but I thought he was really inspiring. I mean, I came
Until we as a society acknowledge the deep iniquities that resulted from our treatment of black people since the founding of this country,
When the mainstream media judges the protest movement by its most violent members, many of which are not even there for the right reasons, and then doesn't judge the police force by its most violent cops, that's pretty hypocritical.
to the same quality material. It's unfair.
Black lives. I say black lives, you say matter. Black lives. Black lives.
Harm can be and has been done.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Support for the Choral Commons comes from the University of San Diego, the Karen and Tom Mulvaney Center for Community, Awareness and Social Action, and the College of Arts and Sciences Arts Engagement Initiative.
USD's Arts Engagement Initiative supports artistic action embedded in and responsive to ever-changing social, cultural, and political circumstances, deep and meaningful engagement with community, and increased access to the arts on the USD campus and beyond.
The Choral Commons is a community where choral music practitioners and organizations can gather in order to envision equity-centered choral futures. With our community and creative partners, we hope to empower choral practitioners with additional strategies for innovation grounded in culturally responsive, critical, and equity-centered values.
My name is Emily Amrine,
And I am Andre de Cuadros.
and this is the Choral Commons podcast.
We sing all of our songs and we get to the final song of the concert, which is Sunny the Candy by Chance the Rapper. And I see that child sprint from the audience to go sing with her choir. So you can imagine, as an educator, I'm ugly crying at this point, trying to hold my shaky iPhone, recording, because at that point it hit me. The child experiencing trauma, excused for school for the remainder of the year, decided to come to the choir concert, but to only participate in one song. I went up to the student at the end of the concert. Why are you here? Why did you decide to sing? She said, Mr. One, I just needed to sing. And how many people are in our choral environments who just need to sing? And we're excluding them, but we just need to own up to it and just face that, because as somebody who is basically out there preaching that choral music can connect us and build community, and I do believe that, we also have to understand how choral music can also exclude and make people feel like they're on the outside looking in.
While choral music has been a site for community mobilization for centuries, only relatively recently has it been a space for activism about racial injustice, particularly in the United States. What, our profession asks itself, must we do to be more racially conscious, indeed anti-racist? The large question about how to chart a justice-focused choral paradigm remains a central question for the future of choral music. Tesfa Wondemagegnehu is a conductor, educator, and activist. He teaches at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, where he conducts 2 choirs and teaches courses on the intersection of music and social justice movements. Through the love and dedication of music teachers with whom he has studied and an abundance of grit and determination, Tesfa has risen to be one of the most sought-after conductors and educators in the country and is on the cutting edge of music-related social justice movements throughout the United States. He is the co-founder of the Justice Choir Movement, a grassroots movement that aspires to harness the empathetic, collaborative, and collective power of communal singing for social and environmental change.
Let's talk about race first, because I think that obviously the Choral Commons is all organized around the idea of equity and justice, and trying to move the conversation in the choral field in a direction that really interrogates and comes to a sort of sense of reflection on the ways that we participate in the inequities that have been present in the discipline for so long. So I'm wondering, Tesfa, if you have kind of reflections on that because of your own identity and also because of your geography being located in Minnesota, which, was the epicenter of this most recent racial uprising in response to the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah, as a black dude living in farm country, Northfield, I can tell you that it's been an interesting time, especially hearing from so many people from around the country. Of course, you got friends and family and colleagues reaching out saying, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I'm reaching out to my Black and brown siblings, figuring out how are they doing. And, I feel like I am privileged, and because I'm living in this bubble. I mean, Northfield, Minnesota is a bubble. Racism exists, of course, in Northfield, Minnesota. Racism exists on my campus, St. Olaf College. But when I think about the work that I am doing, and I think about the work that some of my other colleagues and friends are doing in the trenches, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And I was talking the other day to a friend about this specifically. It's like, as we try to fix choral music, we're fixing the system. I have friends who are saying, I am skeptical of any Black person that white people celebrate. And so if we're living with that tension on this side, and we have this tension on this side, basically now in my position of privilege, I have an extraordinary opportunity to raise conversations to an arena that maybe haven't been having these conversations in the past. What do? Do I listen to this person on the right that's basically saying, yo, get out of there. Get out of there as fast as you can. You need to understand you're just a chess piece in their game. Or, hey, Tesfa, man, you are doing such great work in this predominantly white institution, and all of these predominantly white institutions, if we're thinking about choral music, I struggle. So how am I doing personally? I mean, I am torn every day, but I am looking forward to continuing as of now, and I'm grateful that we have platforms like y'all are creating here with the Choral Commons.
I mean, that blows my mind, the way that you just described your own experience in relationship to the perception from your institution, but also from your Black colleagues and from your community. And I'm wondering if you could you just go a little further?
Yeah, I'll go further. Basically, we were talking about, in the conversation, we were talking about, hey, is there a way for Black, brown, and indigenous people who are in predominantly white institutions to do work and be savvy and get some changes done? And he was just straight up. He was like, listen, the people who are in those spaces who think that they're savvy are actually not the player, but actually the chess piece. And that hit me. And as we started talking about that, I was like, you got to go further. Like, what do you mean by that? And then he came with this statement. I wrote it down because it hit me hard, and I still struggle with it. But let me go ahead and read you exactly what he said. He said, here it is. He said that I look for what makes white people identify with or value in myself, and I make sure I kill that part of me. And so if you're hearing that conversation, that amount of distrust and mistrust and pain and trauma experienced from a Black person who I love, who I grew up with in the city streets of Memphis, and they're saying to me, bruh, you're losing street cred every day you are trying to do this work of decenter whiteness within this choral construct. And you need to, stop doing that. Quit wasting your time in this field. Why don't you go into the trenches and do the work side by side with the people and empower your people directly? You don't need to find a middleman through the choral art form. And now I'm struggling because, here I am, basically, I am now, in a way, redefining my work, and the work that all of us have been doing. And I want to ask y'all, what do y'all feel about that statement? Like, is it possible for us to shift the amount of energy that we're putting into fixing core music and shift it directly into the community? Is that something that we can have a bigger and broader conversation about?
Well, I think the bigger and broader conversation is essential. But one of the things that we need to address is the idea that choral music is going to save the planet. And I hear you laughing. But I think this idea that we keep on saying choral music brings nations together, music will bring peace, choral music fosters community, and so on. And as we know, it can do some of that, and very often it doesn't do any of that. And so I think at least positioning ourselves with some degree of humility and understanding of the limitations of our art form is critical, right?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's like I am guilty of being that person talking about all of the powerful things because I still believe it. that choral music can do for people. Like if we're actually looking at the micro level of influence as an educator, I know if I make a difference in the life of one student, one child, that is impact. Will it lead to systemic change? Maybe not. But
I mean, by itself, it can't lead to systemic change, right? I mean, we when we talk about systemic change, we talk about dismantling what we have, replacing it with something a lot better. But in order for systemic change to happen, it has to happen at every single level of society: policy, legislation, behavior, practices, curriculum, place, architecture of privilege. I mean, there's a lot of change that has to happen in order for systemic change. But therefore, choral music should be in the forefront of change, just as medicine, just as history, just as urban design, just as environmental planning, and all of that needs to be there at the forefront.
At the risk of being labeled like the neoliberal brother from Memphis, I want to just push back for a second and say, like, we say we want to replace the system, and we want to replace that system with something better. If that something better can't guarantee to these donors and to these Board of Regents that it's going to pay the bills, how are we going to sell this cake and make people eat a slice of it? Because for me, I'm just like, I'm all for flipping it. But what my brother is telling me as we're having these conversations is like, dude, the amount of work that it's going to take to flip it, what if you put that same amount of energy into something directly embedded into the community? Right.
So what you're saying is just like you said in our previous conversation, we're talking about actually providing food, for example, and as opposed to working in the art form. Is that what you kind of mean? Is being much more involved in direct action?
Yes, and so, but is there a way to have choral music organizations do that work instead of focusing on because I know we spend so much energy talking about rep. Yes, rep is a big part of it. Don't get me wrong. But like, if you're singing music and you're creating a way for this community member or this entire community to be directly impacted fiscally by your concerts or whatever, I'm down with that conversation. I have no idea what it looks like, but I'm totally down with seeing like, all right, we can dig into this. We can figure out, is there something there that's outside of the academy? Instead of saying we're going to try to fix this thing and we're going to fix, because I want you to know, Andre, and you and I had this conversation last time, is like, I'm totally about, let's fix the rubric, like this very Eurocentric rubric where we're basically saying this is a superior, this is a poor. Like that's work that still needs to be done. But once it's all done and we get to the end of the race and we say to people, all right, this is what the new system looks like. Are people listening? Are people willing to flip? That's the question I have from this wrestling with race in choral music right now.
Right. I think a lot about the ways that we talk about the music doing things, right? We talk about, and Andre, you mentioned this earlier, music saving the world. And I guess I like to think about music as a tool, just like any sort of form of communication, and that it's people who are using the tool that determine the impact, right? So this is a different way of thinking about kind of choral practice that gives and acknowledges the agency of the people in the room, right? And I bring this up because I had an interesting conversation just the other day with a colleague, and we were talking about culturally responsive pedagogy. And this is the idea, of course, that there is a dialogue of sorts between the students in the room and the teacher facilitator, and that it is not, again, this kind of old school method of like the banking model of education, where we're going to place content into the minds of these young people, but rather that it is a relationship where everybody's kind of learning from one another. And I think that in theory, this is all very good. But her critique, and I think it's an interesting one, is that she worries that, especially within predominantly white institutions, educational institutions like the ones that all three of us happen to be working at, all three of us are at private, expensive research and liberal arts institutions, right? Predominantly white. That in the hands of well-meaning often liberal and progressively minded educators that culturally responsive pedagogy ends up actually also being a tool of white supremacy and whiteness, and in fact doesn't end up serving or empowering communities to kind of change the script, to flip the script, as you were saying. And what she was saying, and I'm sorry for like the long build up here, but what she was saying was that in some people's minds, culturally responsive pedagogy means like meeting the students where they are and dumbing down curriculum to make it accessible or likable, desirable, and that in the hands of whiteness, that could prevent students of color from having access to and the experiences and opportunities of a robust music education. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a very specific story from my teacher career. I was a very celebrated high school music educator in the state of Florida. Got to Minnesota. A friend called me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to do an emergency sub job at a school in Minneapolis?" I was like, "Cool, no problem." He said, "Talk to me about the demographics. Mostly students of color, kids mostly free and reduced lunch." Cool. Sounds like my environment to a T from Florida. I walk into that environment first day and I teach a road song. And I'm teaching South African, "Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom." And one of the students raised her hand. She said, "Bruh, why are you trying to make us sing white?" And so you could imagine, here I am, baby, I'm black. Do you see this? Like I'm shocked because she shook me when she said that. But she processed my vocal model as whiteness. So I came in another day with another song. I came in with Pentatonic's Cheerleader, that little ostinato at the end. They weren't having it. Came in the next day. I'm getting humbled every day, by the way. I come in the next day, and I come in with Andy Grammer's Fine by Me. Nope, not having it. So here I am, 3 days, 0 for 3, trying to reach these kids, quote unquote, meet those students where they were. Because my end game at the time was to meet those students where they were and bring them, where I need them to be. And we can struggle with that word need for a second. So I go home and I touch into my Memphis body and I said, what do the kids listen to? What's a bop, as the kids would say right now? And I found Sunday Candy by Chance the Rapper. And I came out with this dope 3-part arrangement, super triadic, gospel style. And so I was like, I got a new song for us today. And I start the YouTube video. And here I am, so happy. I got the sheet music ready. I'm about to distribute it. I put the YouTube video on the big projector on the front wall. The kids screamed, leapt from the risers down into the floor. They knew every step. They were already singing a harmony. My piece of paper was irrelevant. And at that point, that's when I realized, maybe they don't need me. Maybe I need them. As we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy and education, they led the way for me to open my eyes and say, let's see that moment right there as excellence and celebrate that. And let's not use that as a carrot, because that was my end game. My end game was to use that as a carrot and then bring them to Oh Freedom. Just for the record, I thought Oh Freedom was a fun song that was universal, that people would be all into. But that experience for me started making me question at that moment. That was back in fall of 2015 when that happened. And, that girl ultimately withdrew from school because of some drama in her life, horrible drama. And we got to the final concert. She hadn't shown up for weeks. And all of a sudden, we sing all of our songs and we get to the final song of the concert, which is Sunny the Candy by Chance the Rapper. And I see that child sprint from the audience to go sing with her choir. So you can imagine, as an educator, I'm ugly crying at this point, trying to hold my shaky iPhone, recording, because at that point it hit me. The child experiencing trauma, excused for school for the remainder of the year, decided to come to the choir concert, but to only participate in one song. I went up to the student at the end of the concert. Why are you here? Why did you decide to sing? She said, Mr. One, I just needed to sing. And how many people are in our choral environments who just need to sing? And we're excluding them, but we just need to own up to it and just face that, because as somebody who is basically out there preaching that choral music can connect us and build community, and I do believe that, We also have to understand how choral music can also exclude and make people feel like they're on the outside looking in.
So the unwritten bit of her is a wonderful story. That's a really wonderful, touching story. But one of what's missing is that young woman, she didn't just say she needed to sing, but the unwritten bit was she needed to sing that particular song, and the other bits were roadblocks for her. She was excluded. And so, just like you said, here's a big issue of exclusion and inclusion. And I think this story can be a kind of a paradigm for everything. And I'm sure we've all got stories like that. Certainly in my own working in prisons, I've encountered this very often. There's some really harsh teaching moments and learning moments for myself where I presented something thinking that, that's going to work. And then they say, no, we don't like that at all. And then you realize that you have to think differently about repertoire, about meaning, and how that all shakes down in terms of the design of a program and so on.
Right, and it's like all built on the assumptions that we make as educators. I want to just make sure that I ask this important question, which is, have any of your Black, Brown, and Indigenous students wanted to be performing classical music and you didn't give them the opportunity to because you assumed otherwise? Or I shouldn't assume that anybody wants to do any particular thing at all, right? That it actually requires a conversation or some sort of proximity and relationship to illuminate that, in fact, this student who happens to be Black wants to sing Bach, and this student who happens to be white wants to sing gospel. I don't know. How do you negotiate all of that?
Yeah, it's I'm gonna jump in there and just give one kind of weird story because I introduced Gregorian chant into the men's prison, and I thought, when I introduced it, I thought, it's going to be it will go down very badly, but it became a permanent fixture. We would do Gregorian chant every single week. They were addicted to Gregorian chant. So I think it's really, this is not a question that's easily answered. What you've identified here, Emily, is you presented us with a problem for which there is no easy answer.
Agreed, 100%. There is no one-size-fits-all in this scenario. But I want to point to a word you used specifically, Emily. You said relationships. Is that once those relationships were formed, I will say to you, I got a lot less pushback as the year went on. And if we can start to meet students where they are, to build the relationship first, before you even start talking music, I think that we can get a lot more work done. Especially as we think about barriers created or broken in our choral environments,
and building trust, right? I
that's
think
a part of the relationship.
Right.
For sure.
My sense is looking at you and hearing you speak that trust and compassion and loving kindness is central to your work, as it is central to the work that Emily does, and I know that from long experience with her work and certainly what I've seen of your work. But I also want to emphasize that it's not as though choral music is a space where that is automatic. Choral music is a space where people have been humiliated and have been
Yes.
demoralized, and
Yes.
and so that's why your point here, Tesfa, about building trust as a precursor to building community and allowing for vulnerability is critical in the choral environment that we want to create.
And from a practical point of view, I guess the question then is, if, as I was told in graduate school, that, the art of conducting is the art of preparation, how do you go about, making choices about how you're going to do your whole class if it requires this relationship building up front, right? You have to, that's what I think a lot of music educators are doing, and we definitely want to talk about how they're preparing for this particular fall, but they spend the summer making decisions about what music they're going to sing, what concerts they're going to present, the themes of the concert, the festivals they're going to show up to, the adjudication, the choir tours, all of these things require choices in advance of knowing the students that they're going to work with. And so how do you reconcile that if, in fact, what you're talking about with culturally responsive pedagogy requires time and requires, this ambiguity and unknowing for a specific amount of time before decisions can be made?
And so it gets back to our original conversation, is that the benevolent dictatorship has to be broken. People basically have to humble themselves. Ego has to be removed from the equation. And it means they have to be willing to show up at the beginning of the year and know that they can't prepare for their district festival that happens in the spring, starting in late fall, because they've already picked the music and acquired the practice tracks. And they have to understand that there has to be a collaboration. Now, it goes back to what we said. Are people going to buy that? Because we're talking about the way that they've actually been trained through undergrad, through grad school, through doctoral studies. You used the phrase art of conducting, and I giggled a little bit when you said that. Because I could think about people waving their hands, and I'm like, yo, that's some beautiful hand waving, band. Your choir look dead as hell. What are they doing? The sounds ain't even that special. That's like extra mediocre right there. And I'm not throwing shade at any particular choir, but I'm just saying, like, we got to start having, and I'm not knocking people who have gotten the advanced degrees. Like, as somebody who respects all of my mentors who have their advanced degrees, I think they're awesome. Good for them. I don't have my advanced degree in choral conducting. Maybe one day I get it. That's what I'm saying. I'm not knocking it. But what I'm saying to you is that if you're waving your hands and there's a gorgeous gesture and you're showing so much nuance and your singers are not into it and the people in the audience are not into it, you're serving you. You're not serving your singers. You're not serving the community. And that conversation is something that we got to have before we start talking about hand waving 101.
Right, but I don't think that necessarily is just something that's the Eurocentric model. It's actually this idea of the iconic figure, and I think choral music conducting has bought into this idea of the iconic single figure, and I think that's part of the way in which we have fabricated our entire life. In other words, the iconic conductor, the iconic singer, the iconic athlete, the iconic. And we love that. We love these celebrities. And we are taught and enculturated into thinking that in order to be a successful conductor, we need to somehow become celebrities, even if we're celebrities in our own little fish pond, or in our own little lunchtimes. But we are, but that's what it is. You can see that in the way that people present their photographs on social media about themselves as conductors, and the glamour shots. And so I don't want to be critical of that, because I'm critical of it, but at the same time I think we're all sucked into that, and like
it's not just like a question of ideology, though, and it's what you need to do in order to get the gig, and you need to get the gig in order to feed your family, and you need to feed your family, So
and the board of regents, and we have audiences, and we have people who expect certain things, and it's a whole culture, right? It's there.
And so I go back to the original question: why are we bothering? Because let's go ahead and say the system is replaced with something better. And, and there are a lot of people that are saying, like, oh, look at the New York Times article where they're saying, let's do blind auditions. And they say that there's a negligible difference between all of these pros, which might be true. I'm not knocking it. But if people are now going to school and not going to have that conservatory experience to prepare them to play in the New York field, or to sing at the Met, or to sing in all of these incredible professional choirs all over the world, can those institutions remain and pay their bills? Because it goes back to, you just brought the phrase up, pay the bills. Like the Board of Regents, you brought up all of these things, and the pragmatic soul in my body right now is screaming, because I hear those cries, but I also understand, we got to do something. Something has to happen. But what does that work do if we're the only people in our echo chamber screaming it? How does that work become more mainstream? Mm-hmm. And that's the question.
And how does it become mainstream when, like, everybody is like having this existential question of, I can't sing with my students at all because of the pandemic, right? I can't, I have to learn all this new technology to do virtual choir. like these questions of equity and kind of dismantling systems of oppression within our institutions, I have no bandwidth, to deal with these things. Like, how do we make sure that we don't lose sight of these big picture questions in the context of this pandemic?
If I said to you that my first priority this fall, without a doubt, is, man, I want all my students to be safe. Period. That's going to be my first. And safety can mean a lot of things. Like if there's a pandemic that we're facing called COVID-19, but if there's, overt racism where their bodies are being harmed, they're being mentally harmed, we're going to call it out too. So I think that if safety is threatened, we got to do something.
Right. But I think that there are two things to remember in all of this. One is that we are so dependent on the physical space, and therefore choirs are really trying to keep themselves together as single communities. And difficult though that may be in a virtual digital world, I think everyone's wrestling with that thing. How do we keep our community together? So I think that's one thing. And since both of you are generations younger than I am, COVID-19 is as you say, there'll be an end of COVID-19. There'll be a COVID-20 and COVID-25 and so on. And we don't understand even what that future looks like. So these are precarious situations. And so what you're saying, Tesfa, is extremely important. It is that we have to greet the present. We have to prepare for the future. But the central values of safety, of compassion, of creativity, of also vulnerability, have to be embedded in every single encounter that we have.
So if we can use virtual choirs to then have the conversation that we've just been having and say, what if we have virtual choirs to then have speakers come in to show different readings, to have BIPOC artists participate? I think that's a way that we can flip it instead of fight against it. Because I think flipping and fighting against it are two separate things that we should be doing right now, especially when it's coming to dealing with virtual choirs.
Right. I think that, I hear you, and I certainly want to shed the posture of fighting. Like, I feel like that I have been in that posture for a while, and it's not a joyful place to be. But on the other hand, what I worry about is that this kind of virtual choir model is like congruent with what I see in kind of mainstream prevailing choral practice that erases possibilities that like have existed and continue to exist outside of the view of the center. And so I'm wondering, have you found any like really great alternatives? Not alternatives meaning, something that's like not using technology. I mean, still in this kind of virtual world, have you found alternatives that allow for, the singers to have more agency? Have you found examples where singers are, not necessarily working from a score? Have you found examples where kind of some of these kind of issues that we are struggling with in their old world can be manifested in a new and exciting and innovative way in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a part of, I served on the National ACDA panel, and there's buried in the appendix, there is this like super cool overview to say, all right, let's say your student doesn't have a real smartphone. Let's say your student doesn't have a tablet. Let's say your student doesn't have a laptop or a desktop computer. We actually created a guide, that cost the students nothing. We asked basically if you have pencil and paper, and you give the students a journal at the beginning of the year they pick up. And here's some of the activities that we provided for them. I think this is dope. Serenade a relative via phone once a day. Create a weekly music-inspired meal for your family. Play this song or sing this song during the meal and have them describe attributes of the music and assess if your song choice matches the flavor profile created. Like different types of activities. And then we said, why don't you use Google Voice, which is a free software. The teacher sets it up. Student calls in. They basically can sing some stuff over the phone via Google Voice on their time that works for them is completely asynchronous. Have families participate recording with the landline. Is the quality, ready for virtual choir? No. But does it allow people to have complete agency of what that looks like? Absolutely. And I think that there are going to be some people in those environments that are going to have to turn to something other than the virtual choir model.
So let's come back to the kind of big picture of choral music, our profession, and we, all three of us present in this podcast, in recording, are all working in universities, and outside of the universities, there are community choruses, professional choruses, children's choruses, youth choruses, and so forth, church choirs, and more. Are we, as a field, and let's say as conductors, and are we doing enough?
Are we as a whole?
As a profession?
Oh no! Are people in pockets doing this work? Yes, absolutely. And I think that is the hope of your actual media company, is to amplify those people who are doing the work. But I don't think we have reached critical mass in our entire industry, our vocation of people who are interested in doing this work.
Right. Yes,
go ahead.
You're right. We haven't reached. We haven't reached critical mass. I don't even know. Sometimes I wonder whether we've actually reached many ripples in the pond. I mean, if you think about the millions of people who are incarcerated in the United States, and most of whom are African American, almost all of whom are undoubtedly poor, then you ask, why is it that there are so few people, so few choral conductors working in prisons? That is one example. Then you could add homeless shelters. You could look at sites for psychiatric health. You could look at disability. You could look at victims of torture and sexual violence and trauma and so forth. And we haven't really skimmed the surface. If you think about the way we program, where we perform, with whom we perform, for whom we perform, and all of that tends to be a pretty narrow slice of American life.
Speaking specifically about, I would say, my black and brown siblings from my hood in Memphis, I think about how poor that community is and how it's part of my job as someone who has all of this access and privilege afforded to me to use my platform to raise money directly, to provide spaces where they can share their truth. I think about friends who I grew up with, and I think about those friends who I grew up with in Memphis, and some of them aren't here anymore. And here I am in my basement in Northfield, Minnesota, talking on a podcast with my St. Olaf polo and my St. Olaf hat. I feel privileged to be where I am right now, but I haven't forgotten my hometown, and I haven't forgotten my hometown stories and the people who are still living that experience every day of their lives.
Tesfa, you're amazing. I feel so empowered by the conversation to kind of continue thinking about these things, but with a forward-looking vision that makes me feel optimistic and hopeful. So I'm really grateful for the time today that
thank
you've
you
given
very
us.
much,
So.
Tesfa.
Hey,
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much. Appreciate y'all.
Andre and I spoke with Tesfa Wondemagegnehu in mid-July. You can learn more about Tesfa's work with the Justice Choir at the website www.justicechoir.org, and about the rest of his work on his own website, www.tesfa1.com.
Universal healthcare.
Yesterday,
Just now.
Yeah, I've never been to a protest before. This is my first one. About time, right? I wasn't sure what to expect, but I thought he was really inspiring. I came.
Until we as a society acknowledge the deep iniquities that resulted from our treatment of black people since the founding of this country,
When the mainstream
we will never
media
realize our
judges
dream
the protest movement by its most violent members, many of which are not even there for the right reasons, and then doesn't judge
As
the
a
police
teacher, it
force
really
by its
upsets me
most
that all
violent
students
cops.
don't have
That's
the
pretty
same
hypocritical.
access to the same
Black lives, you
quality
say
materials.
matter.
It's
Black
unfair.
lives, black lives. I say black lives, you say matter. Black lives, black lives.
The Choral Commons podcast is hosted by Emily Amrine and Andre de Quadros, produced by Emily Amrine in partnership with Chorus America and the Eric Erickson International Choral Center, and supported by listeners like you.
Additional institutional and creative partners include the Harvard Choral Program, St. Olaf College, University of Hawaii Choirs, University of San Diego, Monado State University Choir, Navai Chamber Choir, and Voices 21C.
If your organization would like to join our list of sponsors, please reach out to us at thechoralcommons@gmail.com or consider joining our community of supporters on our website, where you can schedule regular donations of $5 or $10 a month to help us offset the costs of producing these programs.
The Choral Commons aims to provide a space for choirs and conductors to envision innovative and equity-centered practice. We produce podcasts and interactive webinars and offer curated resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
We connect and engage community in meaningful dialogue on pedagogy and practice, and incubate creative, artistic, and compassionate choral projects that empower choral music organizations to work for a just and peaceful world. The songs you heard in the middle of the episode were recorded at a Black Lives Matter protest that took place in Washington, D.C. on June 8th. The recording was generously provided by Micah Hendler, who leads the DC chapter of the Justice Choir. The sound sculpture that you heard at the beginning and end of the interview was devised by creative producer Chris Clark and featured narration by members of Voices 21C. They created a powerful response to this conversation, which you can hear in full on our website, www.thechoralcommons.com.